this council has considered. But what I will say to you is that the municipal board and the courts have said that in upholding things claimed to be people zoning, that issues will not be resolved by removing from the bylaws the definitions which afford some measure of protection to property owners and residents and to the neighborhoods in which the houses are situated. In a question again of student housing, which this council has dealt with, the board said this: the board can find no basis upon which to conclude that this proposal would create an unacceptable adverse impact on the neighbors or the neighborhood. The corollary of that was that had the board been provided with that evidence, that it was a legitimate planning concern to deal with that adverse impact. And that's exactly what I said yesterday.
With respect to the matter before us, what are some of the legitimate impacts in the community that you consider should be considered and that would be upheld by the board if it were challenged?
So, through the chair, Councillor, I have no expertise in this area. If this were to go to a higher authority, then obviously I would have witnesses that would speak to these issues. But what I have heard in this room in the last 24 hours are issues concerning both the activities of users of the facility outside of the facility, as well as other elements in society which are attracted or could be attracted by the presence of this facility. So I am not here to do that which Councillor McKenney is concerned about, which is to bash poor people. I'm not. What I'm saying is that it is a legitimate concern of this committee to determine for itself if the very presence of this facility at the size that it is proposed at could create adverse impacts both by the users of the facility and those that the facility might attract.
Yesterday at the end of the day, I asked staff why we treat shelters as a category of their own. And overnight, thanks very much to staff, to Ms. Desmarais and Ms. Snedden, I did receive a reply. One of the responses that I got as to why shelters are a distinct land use, defined differently from other land uses, is that they experience car and pedestrian traffic because of their land use function. It has evening and overnight drop-offs and pickup of clients. There's it has lineups. It tends to create lineups is one of the points that was made. These sound an awful lot like community impacts that are outside of the actual property line. Is that so? Is it necessarily appropriate for us to stop our consideration of this shelter past the property line?
No, and you never do. As a council, what you deal with all of the time, just as an example, on every proposal that comes before you, is traffic created. That's a perfect example of an impact, both physical and social. And I'll use an example of that in a moment, of things that go on beyond the property line. So, an example of that is that the City of Ottawa fought a losing battle about traditional main streets in an attempt to prevent drive-thrus. And there were a variety of explanations offered. It had to do with ensuring a continuous street frontage until the board was assured that drive-thrus don't necessarily interfere with that. But another one was interference
perception. It wasn't based on concerns or fears. We had a real study of what those impacts would be. As we consider the impact of this shelter, or more generally shelters, and where to situate them, what kind of evidence should we have before us in order to be able to address those in a way, again, that would be defensible before the board?
So, if this goes to the board, one of the pieces of evidence that, if I am acting on it, I would adduce is a study commissioned by the City of Ottawa in 2008 with respect to shelters in Ward 12. And there was a study. One of the comments I made yesterday, one of the comments I made in the letter that was distributed to all of you, is it almost boggles the mind that a comprehensive study of this issue was commissioned and acted upon by this committee and council, and no study has been demanded of the proponents that would address those issues. So you have it now. Perhaps it needs to be updated, but at the end of the day, what you don't have is anything that says that the conclusions reached by your professional staff were wrong.
And just to conclude on this before I turn to a second topic, it is your expert opinion that our consideration of such a study, updated from a previous version or a new one, is absolutely within the purview of this committee to take under the auspices of the Planning Act and anticipating the potential board challenge.
Absolutely.
Thank you. One of the points that you made yesterday, with which I am in agreement, is we have this question of what is the difference between a residential care facility and a shelter. And it's your assertion that according to the wording of our bylaw, that the majority of this site, almost all of those beds, are captured not within the residential care facility definition, but within the definition of a shelter. As a committee seized with this question of whether or not to permit this particular application to move forward, what are the land use implications, or what are the factors that we should be considering with respect to approving an 801 square meter versus a 6,000 plus square meter shelter at this location?
So, I heard the chair yesterday say they're only asking for an 801 square meter shelter. With the greatest of respect to the chair, it falls to staff and it falls to this committee to say, no, that's not what you're asking for. You're asking for a much larger facility, and the whole thing is a shelter. Now,
and if I may, how should that weigh on our decision?
it is within the purview of this committee to send the application back and say the application is not accurate, do it again. Let me speak to the issue of a shelter and a residential care facility. At the end of the day, the titles given to uses in the bylaw are irrelevant. The issue is, what does the definition say? You could take what we call a shelter within the bylaw and call it bread, but it would still be the same thing. It would be the definition that follows the defined term. An establishment providing temporary accommodation to individuals who are in immediate need of emergency accommodation and food, and may include ancillary health care, counseling, and social support services. That defines everything that is in this proposal. But I'm going to go further. I know from watching the Twitterverse that there was discussion after I left yesterday about the motels that have been converted to shelter use along Montreal Road. It does not fall to staff to reinterpret the bylaw. If a motel is being used for the uses defined under the term shelter, then it's a shelter, and it is no longer a motel. And if this committee and council of those motels, then it should have come back to this committee and to council under the Planning Act, and staff don't have the authority to say, oh, it's still a motel. A motel is defined in your bylaw under the term hotel. Hotel is not defined. It simply says a motel, a motor hotel, and an apartment hotel. So you have to look outside, and here's what Merriam-Webster calls it: an establishment that provides lodging and usually meals, entertainment, and various personal services for the public. If you take those rooms out of the public realm and devote them to shelter use, it's not a motel anymore. There are other definitions that talk about them being usually for the traveling public. That is not what those motels are being used for. A residential care facility, as I said yesterday, is an establishment providing supervised or supported in-house care for those who need assistance with daily living, that may also provide ongoing medical or nursing care or counseling and social support services, and which may include services such as medical, counseling, and personal services. What's not in that definition is the word temporary. So it speaks to an ongoing or permanent living facility. It's what we understand as a nursing home. And so staff have in their report, I would argue, incorrectly defined certain other uses on Montreal Road as residential care facilities, and they are not. They are shelters. When you have a facility that in its own website says it's temporary 3 to 4 week accommodation for people who are in emergency circumstances, it's a shelter. And staff don't get to make that decision. The law is the law.
Thank you very much, Mr. Paul, and I'll defer to the next speaker, but I may be coming back. That was very useful. Thank you.
What do you mean by you're going to be coming back? Not to Mr. Collins. Okay.
My 5 minutes are up, and so I may want to
There are
proceed.
170 speakers. We're at number 34 when he leaves the chair. So I would ask everybody to be succinct with their questioning, please.
I think we're fortunate to have one of the city's eminent municipal law experts
You
and
just
planning
stroked him
experts.
so much now that
we'll take
you have
advantage
your
of that.
resume, Mr. Collins.
Can I get more applause?
I'm sure you're cramming. I know, just more applause.
Don't get used to it.
That's all he wants is applause.
I apologize,
Now
Madam
he's
Chair.
blushing. Now he's blushing. Okay, Councillor Nussbaum, followed by Councillor Fleury, Councillor Eglai, and Councillor Blake.
Good morning, and thank you for your presentation yesterday. I just wanted to follow up on two specific issues. The first, and I guess the starting point for the first, is I absolutely accept that the applicant has every right to apply for an amendment to the official plan and an amendment to the comprehensive zoning bylaw. So I don't believe that there's anything wrong with so doing. But I guess the starting point that we have to consider is exactly that. What is the starting point? So in that, we had a bit of a discussion after you left yesterday in regard to what is the current status of the bylaw, and it's a little bit semantic, I think. But when you look at sections 197 and 198 of comprehensive zoning bylaw 2008-250, you do not find shelter as a permitted use on a traditional main street. And so I guess my first question to you, just so that I understand your characterization of it, is if the use is not permitted in sections 197 and 198, what is it
I read to this committee yesterday the provisions of Section 2 of the bylaw that says no land use, and I don't have it with me, I apologize. Oh, no, I probably do. What it says is, bear with me, no person will use any land, erect, place, alter, expand, or use any building within the territorial limits of the City of Ottawa, except in full conformity with all provisions of this bylaw. Then 197, 198, as with all of the other zoning provisions, will list what is permitted. Okay, if it's permitted, it's in full conformity, assuming that setbacks and other performance standards are honored. If it's not there, Section 2 prohibits it.
Okay, thank you. My second area of question is, I'm looking at the staff report and trying to understand what the rationale would be for why staff would recommend that a prohibited use be permitted in this case. And to that effect, and I'm looking at the staff report on page 3, and the executive summary is a nice opportunity to get a distillation of what those arguments are. I will read you, I think, the most germane sentence. The department is recommending approval of the subject application because the proposed development is, and here there are 3 elements. 1, a relocation of an existing shelter. 2, the built form has been designed in a manner to mitigate land use and physical compatibility impacts. And 3, the subject development does not preclude the ability for Montreal Road to develop in a manner that meets the intention of the traditional Main Street designation. And I guess when I read that, the concern I have, and I raised this with staff yesterday afternoon, is it seems to be that none of those reasons, I mean, firstly, the first of those 3 reasons I don't think is relevant at all, because the current shelter is not on a traditional Main Street, nor is there any indication in the staff recommendation that this is a relocation of one. It's providing a site-specific exemption for the property in question. So let's take 1 out of there and talk about 2 and 3. My concern with those is none of them seem specifically relevant to the property in question. You could apply either argument presumably to this application were it to be proposed for any traditional Main Street. And so my question to you is, do you agree with that? Do you think staff have made a compelling case why, and again, I want to acknowledge that an applicant has every right to apply for an amendment to the official plan. Do you think staff have made a compelling case for why, in this case, we should find reason to go against the official plan and the comprehensive zoning bylaw on the basis of those 2 elements that the staff summarized?
No. So let me address them. The first, and I know, Councillor, that you skipped over that one, but I want to come back to it. That is what I spoke to yesterday. It is this strange application of the concepts of legal non-conforming use, which only apply to specific properties. You know, if I had a shelter there and it was in contravention of the bylaw, but it was legal when I put it there, if it burns down, I can replace it. That's legal non-conforming use. But there is nothing in the law that allows the concept of, I had it over there and it was legal, so I can put it over here and it's legal. That's simply not there in the law. Moreover, it is a mischaracterization of the 2008 study that is referred to it in the 2 sentences prior. That 2008 study called for a reduction of the numbers of shelters, and the byword market was not the focus. Ward 12 was the focus. And so the reference to the byword market is perhaps politically convenient, but it's a red herring. That's the first. The second, the built form has been designed in a manner to mitigate land use. Well, there's a lot of debate about that. There were a lot of submissions yesterday, and I expect for the next couple of days, on whether or not the built form will in fact mitigate the land use with respect to the issues that I've just spoken to, which is the notion of what the users will do outside the property and what elements may be attracted because of the presence of the presence of this facility. And mitigation of by built form is something that is appropriate. There is the compatibility sections of the official plan at section 411, but it goes beyond built form. The subject development does not preclude the ability for Montreal Road to develop in a manner that meets the intention of the traditional Main Street designation. So let me take the committee back in time a little bit. In 2003, the City of Ottawa adopted its first post-amalgamation official plan. There were 87 appeals. In an attempt to facilitate negotiation, the planning department brought those appellants together and there was intense negotiation. One of the issues was that the original 2003 plan talked about something called Main Streets, and it treated Richmond Road in the same way that it treated Maryville Road. And so there was a great deal of debate about that, and it ended up being divided into arterial Main Streets, which have certain policies, and traditional Main Streets, which have certain policies. And one of the elements of the traditional Main Street policy, and it is referred to throughout the official plan, is that it is intended to be a growth area for residential uses, for commercial uses, and for retail uses. The evidence that was put forward yesterday, and I'm sure more will be, is that this facility will likely degrade the ability of Montreal Road to develop in the manner contemplated in the official plan in terms of residential intensification and commercial intensification. And there's already been submissions made to this committee to that effect. So at the end of the day, my view is no. There was an economic study put forward by the proponent that, quite frankly, I'm hoping I get the opportunity to cross-examine the author on, because it'll be fun. Okay? The short answer on the third element is absolutely not. There's been no evidence of that.
When you read the staff report, do you think the same arguments could be used by staff if the applicant in this case were applying to put the subject property on a different traditional Main Street?
I don't believe it belongs on traditional Main Street. So when I started yesterday, what I said, and I will reiterate, I have no difficulty with the proposal. I'm not an expert, at least not at the moment. I may have to become one for a hearing, but I'm not an expert on what the best way to deliver these services are. So for the moment, and I want to say for the moment, I'm prepared to go with what Dr. Turnbull said. Even assuming that that's the case, let's not focus on the traditional Main Street. Let's remember that the majority of this land use will be in a residential area. And a TM zone and an R zone is not where you put something like this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fleury. Then Councillor Eglai, Councillor Blais.
Yes, Madame la Présidente. Thank you, Michael, for being here and taking time of your day and taking a strong stance on this. Want to hear from you. Yesterday, I did ask a question that was answered by John Smith about our official plan. I asked him the clear question which followed Councillor Nussbaum's initial statement. Is shelter a permitted use in the City of Ottawa's official plan?
So what I will say to you is my recollection is that shelter is not addressed in the official plan. I could be wrong on that, but it's clearly a use that is required in this city and in any city. And so the notion of whether a shelter is permitted within the official plan is not the issue here. The issue is this the right location? And clearly, when you read the policies concerning traditional Main Streets, and interestingly enough, there aren't a lot of policies on residential uses, but when you read the policies on traditional Main Streets, a shelter is not a use that is contemplated by the growth-oriented policies surrounding traditional main streets. So, yeah, it's permitted, but again, not here.
Okay, I'll get back to the right location discussion in 1 second, but I had further thoughts on this. So in 2006, there was an interim control bylaw, a freeze on shelters in Ward 12, which followed the 2008 report, which you were discussing. Can you speak, I'm an elected member, council approves documents all the time. What's the purpose of approving documents and then seeing an amendment? Like, at which point do we have authority over and guide the analysis that is conducted by staff? Because in the staff report for this application, there's no actionable item or revision to the decision in 2008.
So I'm going to agree with my friend Mr. O'Connor in his memo that says the actions of a past council do not bind the actions of a future council.
I agree with that as well.
He's 100% right. And so is this committee bound by the results of that study? Absolutely not. And I agree with Councillor Nussbaum. Anybody has the right to bring an OPA application and a zoning bylaw amendment application on anything. I could suggest that we put a 40-story office building in the middle of the glebe. I suspect that there might be a little opposition to that. And at the end of the day, what I would say is that this committee must consider the evidence before it, including its own actions. The 2008 study was one of those actions. And as a consequence, in considering that, that's why I said in answer to a question posed by Councillor Leeper that surely what this committee should be doing is considering the same issues in the 2008 study and either taking them at face value or requiring that another study be done by the proponent or otherwise. But you can't simply ignore it. At least you do at your own peril. Because if this is adopted by this committee and council, then a lawyer challenging this would not be doing his or her job if they didn't subpoena the authors of the 2008 study.
So let's continue on the 2008 study discussion. So there is a shelter cap, there's a separation distances that's highlighted as part of that study. How should we address the fact that the cap has been exceeded in Ward 12? I highlighted the two hotels, hotel motels, which you referred to earlier. There's also shelters for women fleeing situation of violence. There's some from those ending their corrections, parole, I guess, in some ways. How does that factor into this report? Because there's been no appreciation of a city agreement in the hotels, for example.
So, assuming that this committee and council think that this is the appropriate model to move forward with for the Salvation Army, the answer, in my view, is to say, go with God, but not here. Not in Ward 12. If you're moving out of the Byward market, then the city will work with you to help you find an appropriate location, which I understand took place before this site was selected. But the upshot of the 2008 study was a conclusion not that the number of shelters should be held where it is, but in Ward 12, but that they should be reduced. And now you have a bigger problem because staff have decided of their own accord that a motel is still a motel when it's being used as a shelter. And have defined out within the context of the current study other uses that are clearly shelters out of the mouths of the operators And they said, no, it's a residential care facility, because no, it isn't.
Finally, you talked about the right location. I'd love to hear from you. Can you provide an example of how the social impact would be applied to this specific application as it relates to the land use impact for the site?
So I guess what I would say is this council has already spoken with respect to the provision of social services in residential zones with respect to group homes. And it has said, if you're providing social services for 10 people, you can't be any closer than a half a kilometer to another group home in a residential zone. And oh, by the way, you can't be closer than a half a kilometer from a school and a variety of other sensitive land uses. So what I would say is that in the ideal world, a shelter is not located on a traditional main street and is not located in an area surrounded by residential uses on 3 sides. Not when you're going to accommodate more than 30 times what you would allow in a group home.
Thank you.
Councillor Eglai?
Madam Chair. So just some clarity at the beginning. You had indicated, and correct me if I misunderstood you, that the Concord Motel advertises itself on its website as a shelter.
I was speaking
So I'm on their
Maison.
website and I can't see that anywhere.
No, I was speaking, sir, of the Maison Sophia, which is referred to in the staff report.
Okay, just wanted that.
And is classified as a residential care facility. But what it says, what the Maison Sophia says on its website is that it's temporary accommodation of 3 to 4 weeks for certain kinds of qualified refugees that need emergency assistance.
Okay. No, thanks for that clarification, because
Yeah.
I thought you were referring to the Concord Motel.
No, sir.
Which doesn't advertise itself that way. And so for further clarity, I thought this is where you were going, but I was going to ask you, but I think you answered the question. So your opinion is that this facility cannot go anywhere in Ward 12?
Yes.
Okay. So it's not just a question of location, it's a question of location with the parameters that it has to be in one of the 22 other wards in the city.
Sorry, let me amend my answer. Yes was a little flip. What I would say is that the 2008 study approved by council spoke to a reduction in the number of shelters in Ward 12. Without further study as to why putting a shelter somewhere in Ward 12 is a good idea, then I would say that you're stuck with the results of the 2008 study. If further study is done around the results of the 2008 study that says, you know what, because of the following factors, and because we've looked at the number of shelters, and these are our conclusions, then maybe Ward 12 is okay. I still stand by the notion that a residential zone and a TM zone are the wrong places to put it. But I think,
Right, but that's different from saying it can't happen in Ward 12.
I'm sorry?
But that's different from saying it can't be in Ward 12.
Yes, sir, and that's why I took back my answer.
Okay. And so you refer to the study, and the study's not the actual zoning regulations or bylaws. So, correct?
Correct.
Which puts the cap. So, other than it being a very powerful suggestion, if you will, can you explain how the study is binding on this council or this committee to say that you can't go beyond 4? It's a suggestion, but is it binding on us, in your opinion?
No, nothing is binding. As I said, a past council can't bind the actions of a future council. So it's not binding.
No, but what I'm getting at is a study versus an actual bylaw or regulation.
Agreed.
That distinction.
The difference is you can change a bylaw. You can't change the results of a study. And so if this were to go further, one of the things that this committee has to contemplate is the decision a rational one under the circumstances? And so here's what you have. You have on the one side a study that...
Michael, you know where I'm going with the question. The question is, the study cannot tell this committee to have 4 or less than 4 or more than 4. It can only suggest what it thinks is right.
Correct.
Okay,
But I think correct is not enough. At the end of the day, if this goes before the board or courts, you're going to have to deal with the fact that the professional staff in a year-long study of the City of Ottawa reached certain conclusions, and there's nothing on the other side. There's no study that deals with the results and the conclusions of the 2008 study. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I get that. And we've also heard yesterday from people who you acknowledged as experts, like Dr. Turnbull,
yes,
that this, and you didn't dispute that he was an expert in the provision of these services, that this was actually a good idea, this was a good model. You heard that from the Shepherds, you heard that from Dr. Turnbull, you heard that from Wendy Muckler, and again, you've reiterated this morning, and I appreciate that you're not an expert in that area.
I'm not. But here's what I think is important.
And even with all the studying you might do to prepare for a hearing, it's still not going to make you an expert.
No, but I'll have witnesses that are. At the end of the day, Councillor, this is a really important point for this committee. There is a difference between Dr. Turnbull and others saying this model is a good idea and saying this model is a good idea in this location.
I'm going to get to that point in a minute.
Okay, but Doctor, none of the people involved that spoke to the importance of providing these services in a facility like this said, and it's really important to do it at 333 Montreal Road.
So they were silent on that, is what you're saying?
Yes.
So earlier when there was silence, you made an assumption.
How so?
In terms of the bylaw, whether it's prohibited or not, and you disagree with staff on that.
Sir, that's law.
So
that's what I'm paid to understand and what I've been doing for 32 years.
And your opinion is different from staff's opinion in that regard, and that's fair.
They're not lawyers.
Yes,
No,
they
but
are.
Councillor Egli is.
Yeah, but not in this area, Councillor.
we're not going to have
I'm not holding
who's a better
myself out as a
lawyer.
lawyer, but to be fair, we do have 3 legal staff sitting at the table.
But there isn't silence in the bylaws, sir. The bylaw is very clear. You can't do this here unless you change the bylaw.
So let's go back to Dr. Turnbull for a second.
Yeah.
So again, everybody in this room acknowledges the work that he's done and the opinions that he has. And the main thrust of your argument seems to be, or one of them is, that we have to look at the social implications of this plan.
In this location.
Fair enough. But I'm assuming that when we look at social implications, it's fair to look at the positive social implications. Let me finish.
Okay.
And the potential negative impact of not going ahead with the project.
Sir, it's not a binary choice. This committee can endorse the concept and say this is the wrong place. I think it's important to underscore that if Dr. Turnbull had given evidence that this is the right place, that would be outside of his expertise. And at the end of the day, nobody, myself included, is sitting here saying that this is a bad idea in terms of the facility that is proposed. I'm simply saying this is the wrong place for it. And none of the, I'm going to call them industry experts, not a fair characterization, but I want to capture everybody from Dr. Turnbull to the Shepherds of Good Hope and everyone else who's spoken to the value of doing this, are qualified to speak to the issues of the social impact of putting this in this location. So you don't have a binary choice of saying we're not doing it or we are doing it. You have a choice to say we've looked at these issues, and while we think this is a wonderful idea, we think that this is not a wonderful place for it.
So if the likes of Dr. Turnbull and Wendy Muckler are not experts, in your opinion, to speak to the social impacts of having it at this location, who would be?
I think you're hearing from a good deal of witnesses that are speaking to that issue. I think you're hearing from residents and business owners who have indicated a concern about the impact on their homes, their families, and their businesses from the users of the facility and the elements that they may attract. And I am suggesting to you, sir, that you have a professional planning staff, and you have, in addition to it not being a binary choice of yes or no, you have the ability to send these proponents away and say, we don't have enough information on this. Answer those questions before we decide.
Fair enough, but I'm not sure you answered my question. I asked you who would be the type of expert that could speak to this, if not someone like Dr. Turnbull. And I don't think you've actually answered that question.
I think you could hear from the police on the nature of issues surrounding the current shelter and what it attracts. There was, a ruling out of order yesterday with regard to 911 calls at the current George Street shelter. I think you could hear from sociologists on both sides that can speak to whether putting this kind of facility in that location is a good idea. I think you could ask your own planning staff why they don't allow more than one group home housing 10 people every half a kilometer. I think those are all people that you could hear from.
So what I'm hearing is that you don't believe that people actually provide this service to this community, and within that area are someone that could speak as an expert on the social impacts. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, I'm saying that if you would have asked the president of the Shepherds yesterday the question, are there people in the nearby area that are preying on the users of your facility, she would have said absolutely there is. And suggesting that the physical structure of this building is going to prevent that is simply not the case, because people are going to be arriving there. And as they arrive, they can fall prey to those who are going to take advantage of their disadvantage. And I think you have to look at those things. It's why, in part, your professional staff said, reduce the number of shelters in Ward 12.
Okay, last question. After you left yesterday, I posed a question to our legal staff about an issue that you had raised, being that this, in fact, was not people zoning. Our legal staff, and I want to put words in their mouths, but essentially said, no, some of the arguments we have heard today are, in fact, people zoning, and we're not allowed to do that. And to be fair, you weren't in the room when I posed the question. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to that issue again, because what we heard was the impact of the individuals, the services they would be accessing, the type of people that they were. To me, that falls into people zoning. And again, I asked the question without you in the room, so to be fair, I wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to that. And I believe staff also referred to a case. Am I allowed, Chair, to get staff to indicate which case they were referring to, so there's some context for Mr. Paula?
We'll give you the leeway on that for sure, especially the way this conversation has been going.
So if you could remind us all what the case law was?
Madam Chair, that was R.V. Bell.
Okay, thank you, and I'll turn it over to you now.
Okay. So,
You won't be turning it over to him. That's your question. You just briefly answer the question, and then
Fine.
we're going to go. And I'm going to remind people, we're getting, not necessarily with this conversation, but I want to ask you not to repeat questions, okay? So think back on what you've heard, because we are now at 10:25, and still a couple of speakers. Thank you.
okay. R.V. Bell is regarded as the leading case on people zoning. It's a Supreme Court of Canada case. You need to understand what R.V. Bell was about. R.V. Bell was a fight over the following question: whether a dwelling unit could be defined as a separate set of living quarters designed or intended for use or used by an individual or one family alone, and which shall include at least one room and separate kitchen and sanitary conveniences with a private entrance from the outside or from a common hallway or stairway inside. There was then a definition of family, okay, which would have ruled out the sharing of accommodation by non-related people. In that case, on that very narrow issue, okay, the court concluded that the legislature never intended to give authority to make such rules, and the device of zoning by reference to the relationship of occupants rather than the use of the building is one which is ultra vires of the municipality under the provisions of the Planning Act. Now, Councillor, you went to the same kind of school I did, and you know that the finding in a case has to be held within its terms. And in that case, it was a question of whether family could be narrowly defined so as to rule out unrelated people sharing accommodation. That was R.V. Bell, okay? But cases that came later, okay, and that's important. The Ontario Municipal Board, in a case called the University of Western Ontario and London, indicated in a dispute over student housing, when the board upheld the bylaw, it said, the board finds that the clauses in these bylaws are good planning in these circumstances. The problems that the students are presently encountering in regard to housing accommodation are serious and deserve quick attention from the City Council of London and the governments of Ontario and Canada. They will not be resolved by removing from the bylaws the definition which afford some measure of protection to property owner and residents and to the neighborhoods in which the houses are situate. In other words, what the board said was you can look at adverse impact. And in another case before the Ontario Municipal Board called Melancore and Waterloo, the board specifically said, again dealing with student housing, the board can find no basis upon which to conclude that this proposal would create an unacceptable adverse impact on the neighbors or the neighborhood. I spoke to that earlier. At the end of the day, the corollary of that is if there is evidence that there would be an unacceptable adverse impact on the neighbors or the neighborhood, then it is fair game, and it is not people zoning. So, with all due respect to the legal department, at the end of the day, you cannot put a giant fence around the words people zoning and saying it's all out. There are elements of things that speak to the users and those that prey on them, and the adverse impact that it would cause a neighborhood that is fair game. And Bell does not deal with the issues before us.
Thank you. Councillor Blais?
Excuse me. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just like to ask some questions to try to better understand some of your logic and your explanations, if you don't mind. So can you provide to me your view as a municipal expert on what a ward boundary is?
I'm not sure, but let me express it to you this way. If there was a change in the Ward 12 boundaries between 2008 and today, then the 2008 study is only appropriate within the terms of the ward boundaries that existed at that time.
So if the ward boundary were to change tomorrow, the 2008 study for the purposes of this exercise would be irrelevant?
Would be what?
Irrelevant.
No, it wouldn't. Because the study that was conducted was on the Ward 12 boundaries as they existed at that time. And so what I would say to you is that the study still has currency with respect to the geographic definition of Ward 12 as it existed in 2008. And so if you cut it in half and put Vanier in a different ward, you don't eliminate the problem.
So, do you believe that there are natural divisions between wards based on the ward boundary? Or can a community exist across multiple wards?
Of course it can exist across multiple wards, but what I would say to you is, I'm only speaking of the results of what your professional staff did in 2008. It spoke to what Ward 12 was at that time. And I did say, if that study needs to be updated, update it.
Sure. But in the absence of an update to the study, your position is it cannot, such a facility as being proposed can't go anywhere in Ward 12?
No.
In the absence of an updated study?
No. I'm saying this committee and council has the ability to do that. I'm saying it's a bad idea in the absence of further study.
Okay. And why is it a bad idea?
Because you have your own professional staff, and the acceptance of the study by this committee and council having said, yep, what was done back then makes good sense.
So I refer back to, in the absence of a new study, it's a bad idea.
It's a bad idea,
Sure.
yes.
Okay. You also referenced that it should not be in a residential zone.
Yes.
Or a traditional Main Street zone surrounded by residential.
Yes.
So what kind of zone do you think it should be in? Would an institutional zone be appropriate?
Yes.
Would a commercial zone be appropriate?
Yes.
A business park?
Sorry, when I say appropriate, let me narrowly define that. I didn't say it was a bad idea. This council said it was a bad idea. This council said that we're not going to put any more than a handful of group homes in a single neighborhood. This council said we're not putting shelters on traditional main streets. So my answers to your question need to be interpreted through that lens. I am not a planning expert. I am merely a lawyer, and I am saying that in light of previous decisions by council, that it is council concluded that it was a bad idea to put shelters on traditional main streets and in residential areas. My understanding is, and I haven't researched this, that shelters are permitted in commercial zones. And so if that's correct, then council has already spoken on this.
Okay. But you would agree, though, that council in a democracy represents the people?
No.
Council does not represent the people?
No, sir. And what I would say is that reaching back to my political science background, in Canada we have representative government.
Yes.
And representative government does not represent the people, but instead the theory of representative government is that each of you is elected by the people to exercise your own judgment.
That's a different take. The same thing I was getting at, that's perfectly fine. Is it reasonable then to assume that if 80% of the people have changed, that the viewpoints would then change and therefore the view of the people would change? Or
No,
has
sir.
changed? Why not?
Because the study was, in 2008, was not conducted on the basis of who the people were, but what the nature of Ward 12 was at that time.
But it was, your point though is that it was accepted by, you refer to this committee and this council, it was not, but.
Oh, you're speaking of the members of council?
I'm speaking that the people who were charged by the residents of Ottawa to make those decisions at the time, the overwhelming majority of whom are no longer here.
Agreed, and I said that the study doesn't bind what you're going to do, Councillor. At the end of the day, this committee and council has the right, in law, to approve the proposal. What I'm saying is that if this goes to a higher authority, that you are going to have to contend with a study on one hand that is very comprehensive and no study on the other. With respect, Councillor, as much as the Ontario Municipal Board is criticized for overruling decisions of council, municipalities have a very good track record when they agree with the comprehensive study of their professional planners. You don't have such a comprehensive study on this issue today. And that's why I'm saying, when I said to Councillor Egley, it's not a binary choice. One of the things you could do is say, you know what, staff, go away and continue the study that was commenced in 2007. So I'm saying you don't have the evidence to suggest that that study's conclusions are incorrect. The proponent certainly hasn't provided it, and staff has not provided it in the current report. So if, as rational representatives of the people, you are going to make an evidence-based choice, then you need the evidence.
Okay. So you've described that there are some negative consequences or potential negative consequences of such a facility. Would you agree that those negative consequences are likely to remain no matter where the facility is located?
Possibly, okay? And I say possibly because I'm suggesting that if there is another location, it shouldn't be surrounded on three sides with residential uses.
Sure.
And it shouldn't be located on a traditional main street that is badly in need of economic development.
Sure. But there are institutional zones, which you said would be appropriate zone, that
I
are
think so.
surrounded on three sides by residential uses.
I think the answer to that is correct, yes. But that still would raise the issue of residential uses and whether it's a good idea in light of what this council has repeatedly done on group homes. There's no logical nexus between that decision and this, or between decisions on adult entertainment and this.
Okay. So if in your view it should not be located near or at least surrounded on three sides, as you point, by residential uses, and it should not be an area that would potentially depress or impact the economics of a growing commercial area.
No,
What
of
options
a growth area identified in your official plan.
Sure.
Okay? So, traditional main streets are given an elevated place in your official plan, and the city has been jealous to defend that. This abandons that principle, and it says anything goes on a TM street.
What has been our success rate in defending?
Quite good.
Okay.
In the same hearing with respect to drive-thrus, I can tell you that the other thing that we objected to was the designation of certain streets that clearly were not traditional main streets at that time, but the city had ambition that they would develop in that direction. So one of them was Scott Street, which in 2009 or 10, whenever that was, no, it was earlier, 2006, when this was fought, was an industrial area on the south side and vacant land on the north. And the board concluded that it was appropriate for the city to designate Scott Street as an area of potential traditional Main Street type growth. The city was successful on that. Similarly, with respect to Main Street as it was in 2006, and both of them have grown in that direction. So the city's defense of traditional main streets has actually been pretty good.
I'm done, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor?
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Paulin, I just want to clarify your thinking on something that you had said earlier. So you, and just correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we're going to get into it. I think this is going to be pretty short. Your contention is that anything that is not expressly permitted in the bylaw is therefore dispermitted. Is that correct?
No, I'm saying your bylaw says that, sir, in section 2.
Okay, so let me try this again. Your contention is that the study that was done in 2008, that in your view supports the bylaw, indicates that the shelter has no place on a traditional main street.
Yes.
Okay?
But moreover, that the number of shelters in Ward 12 should be reduced.
Okay. And your solution to council and committee navigating around that is to simply change the bylaw, which we're well within our ability to do.
Yes, but I would say that if you're making an evidence-based decision, you don't have the evidence to do it.
Okay? I accept your point. All right, thank you.
We're back to Councillor Leeper briefly, please.
Thanks, Chair, and I will make it brief. Just to clarify in my own mind, you have suggested that we should be studying the impacts, negative or positive, of siting this shelter in a traditional main street.
So here's what I would say. I would say that every time this committee shuts down discussion on that, you are creating grounds of appeal. And the reason that I say that is there is a requirement of fairness and natural justice. So let's assume for the moment that it is fair to say that it is uncertain as to whether or not the advice of your legal department on whether this is people zoning is or is not correct. I say it's not, okay? At the end of the day, shutting down discussion on the issue leads to a question of whether fairness is in play and whether natural justice has been denied. Those things are forbidden in administrative law, which is what this is, and as a consequence, all it is doing is creating grounds of appeal, whether it is to the board or to the courts, because this decision will be subject possibly to judicial review by the Superior Court.
And that, thank you, because you did answer the second and third questions. What kind of risk are we exposing ourselves to, especially if we want whatever decision we make to be defensible, if we continue to operate within this very small box of considerations that stop at the property line?
Right.
And I agree with you that we are probably working counter to coming up with a decision that is defensible before the board if we continue with our current approach. Thank you very much, Mr. Paulin.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the committee.
Okay, next up, and I'm going to call 3 people, please. No clapping. Remember the rules from yesterday. Thank you. Alexandra Gremate. You're first up. Peter Kucheripa. You'll tell me how to pronounce it. And Natalie Belovic. Natalie, you'll be third up. So, welcome again.
Bonjour, merci.
Bonjour.
Hello, thank you. I'm going to speak in French.
Basically, I think he spoke in legalese a bit more than most of us residents can, but certainly that's how we feel. Je parle en mon nom.
I'm speaking in my own name. I provided documents. I'm speaking on behalf of myself, my neighbors, and those who have signs on their lawn. We, in my case, and since the early 90s, and others are newer to the neighborhood, they were attracted, and they're all property owners. Some property owners have income properties, and they're cognizant of the impact with regards to security and growth and safety of our children, and we are against the proposal. We would like the committee to render a decision that is representative of the consensus set out by most of the interveners here. We do believe that it is conform to the objectives and the policies in the official plan. We believe that the proposal does not respect the spirit, and that is what has been discussed here, other than technical legal arguments, and the intentions, what is the spirit behind the notion of a traditional Main Street designation. And we are of the opinion that this proposal does not at all respect the Montreal Road secondary plan. We believe that Mr. Leeper spoke about the technical aspects. This is we're operating in a small box for technical issues here, and you have certain parameters and terms, and it would be a grave mistake, and there would be serious consequences. And if you do not consider the 10-year lodging plan and the plan to fight against homelessness, the social repercussions that this project could have on our community. This is an affront in the opinion of the average resident of the neighborhood. It's an affront to the very notion of urban planning to evacuate aspects that are found in the plan. So we hope that, other than hearing the technical arguments, that you will also, with also the recommendations, despite the recommendations that are made, that you'll be able to not limit yourselves to this very procedurally limited aspect, and that you will be able to represent the will of the majority of the residents, that you'll be able to look at this with a critical eye, and that you'll be able to use a holistic approach in your decision making. I know that we've spoken of the holistic approach, and this was represented in the design of this establishment, but as has been clearly stated, we cannot limit ourselves to only the property. We're talking here about the survival of a community, in our opinion. Vanier is small. It's a very distinct community. And now I'd like to talk about the specific siting in the historical part of a distinct region. It's supposed to be the French Quarter, our region, and so our area. So why is this street? Why does it have traditional Main Street designation? Not only for economic growth, but also so that residents ourselves, we, a specific community, we will have a place where we can gather and where we can live. I think that we've heard many street names, but truly what we have to keep in mind is, for example, because this is what we expect, to put an establishment such as this on Preston Street in the Italian, in Little Italy, on Somerset, in Chinatown, well, this is a comparison that we should be using. So why not here? Because this is a distinct neighborhood, is the Vanier neighborhood. You should have the political courage to take a decision that will be better than simply accepting to do what is convenient, because potentially this is according to the opinion of your legal staff, and we understand that it will be up to the Municipal Boards Commission of Ontario to decide in the end.
Thank you for coming out today, and thank you for coming out yesterday.
Merci.
Coming back today. I see no questions, so thank you again, and thanks for your submission. Following up to sit in Mr. Gramet's seat is Claire Carrière. And now, Peter, how do you say your last name?
Churupa.
I wasn't even close, thank you. And I probably couldn't even repeat it. But welcome, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Chair, my name is Peter Kuchurupa, and I'm a lawyer and resident of Vanier. I speak for myself today as a community advocate, and I have a presentation that's going to be thrown onto the screen as I speak. I chair a community committee which authored an objective report concluding to our surprise that the Salvation Army breached all the city rules when it comes to shelter locations in Ottawa. With this in mind, I'm going to speak to two important issues today: traditional Main Street and the cap and separation requirements. Please skip to the next slide and the slide after that. So on the issue of traditional main streets, the question we have in front of us today, oh, thank you. I now have a remote. Perfect. Traditional main streets. The question we have in front of us is, we know that a shelter is not permitted on a traditional main street. The question is, should a shelter be permitted on a traditional main street? So there's a lot of issues that you will be presented here today. Those issues are likely going to arrive. Increased traffic and transportation issues, substantive volume of poor people that will have a detrimental economic impact to a traditional Main Street zone. There are numerous safety and security concerns, including intimidation, blockage of commercial activities, and also that the proposal has not been properly vetted or assessed by the BIA for a commercial objective plan. And of course, it will result in lower investment, property values, and attractiveness of a traditional Main Street. So when we look at all of this, we say this doesn't seem to be a right fit under the planning rules. And on top of that, there's a 2008 city report that provides that it should not be located based upon evidence presented 10 years ago. And this evidence is still valid today, as there is no policy justification or no evidence that has changed in the last 10 years, as presented in our previous speaker. So as a matter of due diligence, we really should be looking at undertaking a legal assessment and a policy assessment to look at the impacts of a shelter on a traditional Main Street zone. If not, we set ourselves for proper appeal. Second question I want to talk to you about today is the separation and cap requirements. So, we've had a lot of debate yesterday afternoon on what is a shelter. Now, this is difficult to read on the screen, but there's a few things I want to highlight, and we'll be sharing this with the councillors. The city interpretation note of a residential care facility includes things like a nursing home, a complex for handicapped persons, and homes for the aged. When we look at a group home, we look at the group home must be the entire facility. And we look at issues of cost. Who's paying for this? In a shelter, it's likely free. But in other circumstances, the resident is expected to pay. And the last issue is chattels. And I will get to that in a moment. So when we were talking to the City of Ottawa Homelessness Coordinator, they spoke about the issue of shelter for 30 days or less, meaning in a shelter, people are expected to stay there for 30 days or less, expected. In a residential care facility, they're expected to stay there longer, and they're also expected to have chattels, which means they can say, I want to bring my flat screen TV to my room. I would like to see if a resident of the proposed site can bring a flat screen TV to their room. I wonder what the reaction would be by the Salvation Army. So, we've done an assessment, and we've looked at how the definition of shelters applies to different facilities across Ottawa. And we've seen in this ward that there are actually 12 shelters in Ward 12 that attain the legal definition, as you can see on the map. And those circles around them are the 500-meter separation distance between those shelters. So the question is, what is the primary use of funding and source of a facility? This is the debate where we say if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it must be a duck. Well, if it acts like a shelter, it functions like a shelter, it must be a shelter.
1 minute.
And if we look closely at this, there's actually 3 shelters located within 500-meter distance of the proposed site of 333 Montreal Road. Now, we follow the legal definition, we follow the definition provided by law, and we look at an applicable look at what shelters are, and this is the conclusion we have. As such, it's recommended that the city, I'll bring this back up, the city look at and do an assessment on what facilities actually attain the definition of shelter within the Ward 12, so we can make sure we have a transparent and accountable assessment of the separation and cap distance requirements. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fleury has a question for you.
Peter, thank you for being here, and thank you for doing the analysis. I'd love to hear a little more clear. If we were to narrow in on one of the shelters, which I don't want to put any women in situation of violence, any of those shelters' addresses publicly. I don't think that's useful. So let's use one that's a little more neutral, the Ottawa Inn. In your mind, how does the Ottawa Inn function as a shelter, and how would be best to recognize that use?
Thank you, Councillor Fleury. The question is the Ottawa Inn a shelter? And the answer is yes. This is because the Ottawa Inn has tenants that are being taken care of under a shelter environment. It is actually being paid for by the city to accommodate people for temporary residences as an objective as shelter. It is named by the city as a temporary shelter. It is called a temporary shelter because that's what it does. It provides short-term accommodation for those in needs paid for by the city. Now, it's interesting in this scenario because the city takes out money, they hand it to the Ottawa Inn, and they say, take care of these people for me as a shelter location. Well, if the city acknowledges it's taking care of people on this location, is it not then a shelter on a traditional main street, violating the cap requirements and the separation distance requirements? It also then binds the city in a position where they can't build another shelter within 500 meters of this location. For the city to give money to this and to have it used mainly and functionally as a shelter, as a primary use and funding source of the facility, and then turn around and say, well, we don't really think it's a shelter, that's essentially being willfully blind of a legal application of shelter within the city.
Thank you.
Councillor Blais?
Good morning, thank you. I believe you had listed 3 criteria that helped you define what a shelter was, and I didn't quite hear what the third one, I couldn't make out the word you said, so I'm hoping you could clarify that.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you're giving me the time to go through this in detail. 5 minutes just isn't enough. So we looked at the criteria on the top. We looked at what was provided in the bylaws. Okay, we looked at size. So we have size requirements on the left. We have facility requirements, and we have attributes. So attributes, for example, for a shelter is emergency, which means it has to be accessible. If somebody comes to the location and says, I need to be put into an accommodation because I am homeless, and the city turns around or a service provider says, yes, we can do this, the facility will accept the people within a very short notice. For example, within 24 hours. This person could be placed in a facility. That's an emergency aspect. These facilities are expected to have the person there within 30 days or less. Now, there may be more. We know there's circumstances that change, but they're expected to be the 30 days or less, and this is compounded by your experts in the city who say, yes, shelters should be 30 days or less. And also, if we look at this, the client's not really expected to have stuff, right? They're not expected to have chattels. They're not going to move in with their big screen TV, the couch, the stereo system. They're going to walk in with the things they have in their hands, very likely.
Peter,
and the cost is free.
Peter, thank you. Sorry, it was the word chattels, which I hadn't picked
Yes.
up on, so I appreciate that.
Yes.
So if I can summarize perhaps, and you can say yes or no to my understanding, if the temporary housing or temporary residence, whatever verbiage we want to use, is paid for by government, you believe that it's a shelter versus if it's some kind of temporary solution that you're paying for to receive treatment of some kind, it's a residential care facility. Is that the prime difference in your view?
That is a primary difference, but it does not necessarily have to be government. It could be
Paid for by others.
By others, for example. But the objective here is somebody walks in and there's no cost to that individual for the services being provided.
Okay. And so how do long-term stay hospitals differ then?
Well, the primary objective of a long-term stay hospital is a health, right? Is a health assessment. Okay. And you're right. Your city definition is strange and unusual, the way they provide these words in law. And we're bound by this. We're all bound by these rules.
I appreciate that. So
If you look at the residential care facility, it does provide nursing homes, which would imply that would be an environment where you need long-term health services. And by looking at the interpretation note, and it's a supervised living environment where they're expected to stay more than 30 days, there are other definitions that would probably attain higher health requirement facilities.
I appreciate that.
Yep.
Is it not reasonable to conclude that services provided to aid individuals with substance abuse problems, which lead to health issues, provided in a longer stay format, how is that different than a long format hospital type setting? If you're staying for a long period of time in a room or a bed that is assigned to you, and you are receiving treatment or service related to helping you improve your health status in some way, what is the difference?
Well, the difference is term of accommodation. If you're in there for likely less than 30 days, under our definition, it's a shelter, and we provided on the map those facilities that attain that definition under 30 days. Now, under this shelter definition, you are permitted to provide other social services. So it could be drug addiction, it could be abuse, it could be immigration issues, it could be a wide variety of other issues. But as long as it's temporary lodging under 30 days, and it's free, right, and you're not expected to have stuff or chattels, these are all the facilities that attain that definition.
Okay, but if you're allowed to bring stuff,
Well, when you bring your chattels, you're implying you're going to stay more longer than 30 days.
That's fair, sure. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I see no more questions. Thank you very much for coming out today. Taking your seat will be Celine Heinbecker. Celine, if you're here, are you here? Thank you. And now we go to the next speaker is Natalie Belovic. I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of Council. Je pourrais m'adresser en français.
I can speak in French today, but I chose to speak in English to facilitate everyone's understanding.
Jewel, resident of Manor Park and also property owner in Vanier. My mom and my son live there. And I also want to note that the Manor Park Community Association has filed a letter of opposition with this committee. I'm here to ask the Planning Committee to reject the application by the Salvation Army. And I understand that it's a very difficult position to be in because of the nature of the applicant. We all understand that they do great works in the city, and it makes us look at them in a different light than if it were just Joe Schmo developer coming to make this application. However, simply put, the application isn't in line with the spirit of the traditional Main Street zoning. To call the facility a community hub is a misnomer. It really is a 350-bed shelter of temporary housing for people. There are many shiny objects that are being thrown at you, but at the root of it, it's still a temporary building. You've said that human impact is not part of what the Planning Committee looks at in its decision-making. However, I think that that is flawed because zoning bylaws are put in place with the intention of protecting neighborhoods, spirit of living, style of housing, and density. So those are all impacts on human living. I understand that it's hard also for suburban councillors to appreciate these kinds of projects and demands because from the suburban perspective, your communities are so finely planned and tuned, there are really very few opportunities for things like this to arise. But as urban residents, we are constantly bombarded with people trying to push the envelope and overdevelop or change the development scheme and focus that the city has had in place. I also strongly object to the process and to the way that this deal seems to have been brokered in the back rooms of City Hall. I appreciate that The market is not the touristic jewel that Ottawa wishes it to be. However, by moving one problem to another area does not solve the problem. It just moves it. I asked the question too, when the city also now will get pressure from the developers around the Shepherds of Good Hope. There's a hotel being built across the street, or the beautiful new art gallery and luxury condominium across from the Mission. How long will it be before the city is also pressured again to deal with these issues? And again, is Vanier going to be known as the only place in the city where these facilities can go? Because that's what we've heard from the Salvation Army, that this was the only possible location in the entire city of Ottawa for this facility. And I find that absolutely ludicrous. I'm also a real estate agent. I'm quite aware of what's available. And I put forward to you, what about Le Breton Flats, which is just in the middle of development? What about Bayview Yards? What about the Gladstone redevelopment? What about Shopper City East? What about Lincoln Fields? They're all close to employment opportunities. They're all close to transit. I don't believe that those were ever in the consideration. Also, we've been told that there'll be economic benefits to the community if this application is approved. And I find that ludicrous. There will be 200 people working at the site, coming in and out. That is not enough for a potential business owner to set up shop on a street to potentially service those people. The users of the facility won't be shopping on the main street either. As far as the parking reduction, and we haven't discussed that very much, it is way underserviced for parking. Although Montreal Road enjoys the number 12 bus, I think everybody in this room would agree that the number 12 is one of the worst buses in the city. It runs late, it's always full, and it's sketchy at best. So to think that the workers at the site are going to be taking the bus when they're working long shift works late at night or early in the morning is kind of ludicrous. They'll be wanting to park, and they'll be ending up parking on the narrow streets of the community. The Salvation Army hired an awesome architect. However, the reality is that the Salvation Army doesn't permit using on their locations, and those people will spill out into the community.
Thank you very much. And thanks, because you actually raised some different points that we haven't heard most of yesterday. It was good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I don't see any questions. Thanks for coming out.
You're welcome.
So to sit in Ms. Belovic's place is Giselle Bouvier. Giselle, if you're here, please come forward. And now we'll go right to Claire Carrière.
Bonjour tout le monde.
Bonjour.
Good morning, everyone. I'll be speaking English also to simplify things.
Just before we start counting your time.
Nous avons tous, vous pouvez parler dans la langue de votre choix. Nous avons tous des écouteurs pour l'interprétation simultanée. Et vous avez sans doute remarqué qu'on s'en sert. Alors, j'ai une bonne oreille lorsque les gens parlent en français, donc j'ai besoin de ceci en tout temps. Alors, c'est comme vous voulez. Merci.
Je will be best, thank you. First, I'm not an expert in anything being discussed here today. In fact, I'm really nervous. Except that I've spent more time than I ever wanted to, listening, learning, researching, attending many meetings I had to fight to get access to, a few even with Salvation Army, finally, so that I could better understand how this proposed land use might affect my participation in my community. I've pretty deep roots in Vanier. I'm a French-born, semi-retired HR professional, proud grandma, attended Rideau High School. My 3 sons were born at the Montfort, was on the board of the VCA. I volunteer at our community gardens. So though I'm not an activist, getting myself blocked from my mayor's Twitter account certainly has me thinking otherwise. Thanks, Monsieur. I choose to live in Vanier for many reasons, but partly this is where I can let my French flourish, and it's where being involved in this community is really quite gratifying. So please don't preach to me about not doing our part. I care about doing the right thing for those needing a hand up, I applaud the good that the Salvation Army does, even though I might not agree with some of their doctrines. Despite some evidence to the contrary, there's some pretty great places to enjoy here in Vanier. And there is a serious imbalance between those in need of help and those able to be that help. This proposal further impacts that balance. So should this developer get to impact my ability to safely access an entire city block on my main street? Today, there are 10 times the number of police calls to George Street as there are to Montreal Road. How does more, maybe better square footage, make all these things disappear? There's so many ambiguous facts you've heard. I was here yesterday too. What's the actual number of Vanier residents accessing Salvation Services? When is a shelter not a shelter? When is a hotel not a hotel? Not easy to conclude the adverse or no adverse impacts. I really do sympathize with you. So forgive me though if I'm dubious about that 15 to 85% split in service the Salvation Army speaks about. For me, there's 350 men-only short-term beds being proposed. If 300 men show up at their door one night in need of a place to sleep, will they be turned away? When I asked this question of Mark Provost, his answer was no. They would try to find them alternate arrangements, but if beds weren't available elsewhere, beds within this new shelter would accommodate the overflow. I can see the possibility of a pattern here, because empty beds generally don't get funded. But we all know that developers don't renege on development restrictions, right? My concerns here are based on decades of evidence and police statistics. I'm not targeting people, I'm looking at facts, just like many of you are too. So when I asked the Salvation Army, again at a meeting, about their efforts for ensuring my safety, their response at that time was, it's a police issue. Or they described a bunch of safety precautions they'd be taken for their employees. Not very reassuring for me. I also don't buy the Salvation Army party line saying that the 350 male clients will all sit around and chit-chat over coffee in the pretty courtyard. Winters get a little cold here. Humans need the freedom to wander.
1 minute.
Then add this dynamic to a neighborhood where serious struggles are already occurring. Frankly, it's like putting the fox in the hen house. No matter what they decide to call this institution, given that a community hub doesn't allow overnight use, to me, you're trading a shelter for a shelter in a new neighborhood. You don't need to scratch too deep to see that this is simply a money-making men's shelter wearing lipstick. I think I'll end here. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Blais has a question.
Thanks very much for coming out this morning. If one of your concerns is that they may use the other aspects of the facility as overflow for temporary sheltering, if you could be assured that that would not happen in some kind of very formal, not just taking their word for it kind of way, would that alleviate your particular concern?
No, because it doesn't change the imbalance that currently exists. You asked yesterday why the businesses don't come. We know why the businesses don't come. We just hesitate saying it because of getting pinpointed NIMBY and other things. But there's an imbalance. 350 more in that opposite side of balance to get economic viability doesn't help the neighborhood.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming out today.
Merci.
And so sitting, okay, so I guess I'm going to have to read the part about the booing and the clapping again, because yesterday you were so good that it actually warranted, you know, congratulations at the end of the day. In fact, Michael Paulin wasn't the only one that got that applause yesterday. But please, we've got a lot of speakers to go through, and I hope that anyone here who is in this room today that's on the list that we get to today, but we are at like 170, and we are currently, I'm going to ask Celine to speak next, and she's number 37. So the next person to come and sit at the front, please, is Denise Beauchamp here. Denise, come and have a seat. And Celine, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to speak today because I wanted to express that I'm disappointed in the Salvation Army for giving me reasons to be disappointed in the Salvation Army. I'll start with some context similar to what others have said, and then I'll get specific about this case. I chose to live in Vanier for many reasons. It is ethnically diverse. It is linguistically diverse. It has residents from various different backgrounds. It has a large Indigenous population. These things make the area interesting to live in. I have volunteered with the Vanier Beautification Committee. I pick up litter in Vanier. I ride a bike, I don't own a car, and I like living in a downtown neighborhood. I have donated produce from my garden to the local food bank called Partage Vanier. I donate to the Mission, the Ottawa Food Bank, OCISO, Oxfam, CARE, and the UN Refugee Agency. I have volunteered for 4 months in Guatemala for Habitat for Humanity. I have volunteered serving food at the Shepherds of Good Hope. And I'm saying all this because I'm disappointed that Vanier residents are being called NIMBYist, racist, and against the homeless in social media and some traditional media. There are shelters and various special housing in Vanier and elsewhere in our ward, and we don't complain about them. In fact, we support them and we volunteer. This is not about a community rejecting the downtrodden. A man who lives on George Street spoke here yesterday. He accused the residents of Vanier of NIMBYism and then urged this committee to endorse the idea of the Salvation Army moving its shelter away from his street and into Vanier. I would invite him and others to move to the streets near 3033 Montreal Road to get to know our community better. I used to donate to the Salvation Army, but I will no longer do that because of the way the Salvation Army has decided to approach this issue and how they have created conflict in my community and across the city. Their approach has pitted people against each other. If you don't support their proposal, you are against the homeless. I do not agree with that statement. If the Salvation Army had made a call to the public, including Vanier residents and residents of other communities, if they talked to the BIA, to the social services, and we heard yesterday that they did not speak to CSC Vanier, which is a major hub of services in our community. If they had spoken with Indigenous representatives, and I have heard from people who work in that community that they were not approached. I don't know if they've spoken to sex workers that we worry about on our streets. I don't know if they've talked to former addicts who are our neighbors. If they had taken the time to gather ideas and listen to our concerns, they could have avoided this conflict and this crisis situation we find ourselves in. One of the councillors yesterday asked about the public consultation on this proposal. The community found out about this proposal through the media in June. The Salvation Army refused to have a public consultation during the summer. We know from public records that the Salvation Army did take the time to meet individually with the mayor and several members of council. The Salvation Army made a presentation in an apartment building on Montreal Road that was closed to the public. The Salvation Army was going to have a closed-door meeting with the board of the Vanier Community Association, but residents insisted the meeting be opened. In that meeting, the Salvation Army was not able to answer very basic questions about whether the proposal considered the safety and security of nearby residents. They had no interest in changing their design based on community input and questions. The September 13th event was called an open house and consultation by the Salvation Army. It was an open house, but respectfully, it was not a consultation. It was held outside of Vanier, which is a very important point. They did not hold it in Vanier. It lasted about 6 or 7 hours, possibly in the hope that no critical mass of residents would develop to ask them questions. The Salvation Army survey document that they were circulating asked something like, "Did you learn anything today?" There was no panel of Salvation Army staff, no microphone, no chairs for people to sit, no schedule of speakers. It was a box-ticking exercise. They were clearly not interested in hearing from us or open to making meaningful changes to their proposal. Before these 3 days of planning committee, we, the residents, businesses, social services, never got to have a meaningful engagement with the Salvation Army to discuss the needs in our community and the concerns and questions of our community and whether the proposed land use makes sense as envisioned by the Salvation Army. As it is, we can speak here to this committee, but not to the Community and Protective Services Committee, which should look into this case. We have an opportunity to do something positive for the clients of the Salvation Army and the residents and taxpayers of Ottawa. Please vote against this proposal and tell the Salvation Army they can come back to you once they have genuinely engaged with the community and worked with a variety of stakeholders on a viable plan that takes into account their clients' needs, the interests of local businesses, and the questions of residents of various ethnic and socioeconomic backgrounds. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for that. I've made some notes. I'll be asking staff some points that you've raised, actually. I don't see any names on the board, so thank you very much for your presentation today. Next up, we got Giselle Bouvier. Giselle. And next in the on-deck chair, so we have Denise Beauchamp and Marilyn Jacot.
Marilyn has to come up, I think.
Yeah, if Marilyn can come up to the seat, that'd be great. Thank you. Bonjour, Giselle.
Hello.
Hello.
The policies of the provincial policy statement set out the government's land use vision for how we settle our landscape, create our built environment, and manage our land and resources over the long term to achieve livable and resilient communities. The PPS also states public service facilities should be co-located in community hubs where appropriate, to promote cost effectiveness and facilitate service integration, access to transit and active transportation. Planning staff has omitted the part that says where appropriate. It is not appropriate in an already vulnerable community like Vanier. Many of the presenters before me attested to that vulnerability, and many interveners after me will do too also. You cannot ignore this. This development will not achieve a livable and resilient community. It will destroy the community. The Ontario Planning Act provides the basis for preparing official plans and planning policies to guide future development. In the city's official plan, Volume 1, Section 2.5, Building Livable Communities, a preamble states, a focus on community design draws attention to how buildings and the spaces around them look and function in their setting. This is what planning staff has done. In the same paragraph, we read, the best urban design is informed by a solid appreciation of a place being built, the people in it, and the community around it. Since planning staff has ignored both the people in it and the community around it, I am deeply concerned that no social impact assessment was done. First, concerning the people in the place to be built. Of the men who will move from the current Booth Centre to the proposed site in Vanier, many have addiction and or mental health issues, a few with unpredictable and at times violent behavior. The men-only Booth Centre has a record of being in the top 5 addresses for calls to the police, which is no surprise since it is a magnet for predators offering sex and drugs. Second, about the community around it, under Section 251, Urban Design and Compatibility, one of the design objectives is to create places that are safe, accessible, and are easy to get to and move through. As for safety, there was an unusual spike this summer in unwelcome activities on and near our traditional Main Street. Other communities experienced this as well. I found out the cause at yesterday's committee meeting. A private security company was hired to clear the Byward Market area and down George Street before Canada Day 150. As a result, we got to see people openly dealing drugs, offering sex, and furtively injecting drugs. Strangers have been trespassing on private property. Residents have found hypodermic needles in their own backyards and been victims of theft from their cars. This has given us a taste of what to expect when the criminal activity around the Booth Centre moves to Vanier. And since the proposed facility will have many more beds, we can expect an even greater frequency of this activity. While the applicant's plans and flashy PR documents show a 6-story building, the planning staff's report mentions twice that a 12-story building is allowed on the site. We can expect the same scenario that occurred in Old Ottawa South, where a builder received approval to expand a 6-unit apartment building to 12 bedrooms and ended up with 27 simply by requesting a minor variance to the Committee of Adjustment. If the application is accepted and the applicant has expressed they are looking to further expand, We expect to see a request before the Committee of Adjustment for a minor variance to add 6 floors, which will not affect the size of the approved land area occupied by the building. With 12 floors, we will end up with the equivalent of 2 shelters, not 500 meters apart, but all concentrated in one site while circumventing the 4-shelter cap. At least the increased clientele should contribute greatly to economic development, that of the drug and prostitution industry. Passing these amendments will open the door not only to the construction of the multi-purpose mega shelter as proposed, but also as allowed, that is, with 12 stories, and with all the surrounding criminal activity within a community that simply cannot afford further degradation. Vanier residents are saying enough is enough.
Great, thank you very much for that. Excuse me, folks, again, we don't allow for cheering because then we have to allow jeering. Thank you very much for that presentation today. We'll have Hortense Callio, please come and sit where Giselle is sitting right now. And next, Madame Beauchamp. Vous avez 5 minutes pour présenter.
5 minutes for your presentation. Members of the Planning Committee, dear councillors, my name is Denise Beauchamp, 340 Montfort Street since 1967, member of the Social Impact Committee on Vanier. As a member of the Francophone community, I'd like to register my vote against the application made by the Salvation Army for the construction of a mega refuge for people who are homeless. 333 Montreal Road is situated in Vanier. The French Quarter for families. I live right behind the site that is proposed. The Salvation Army and the city have not measured the cultural impact of their project on the population of the Francophonie bastion in Ottawa. We need something that will value our Franco-Ontarian heritage. I'd like to attract your attention to sections 1.1.1 and 1.4.1 of the secondary plan for the Montreal Road District, in which the City of Ottawa has taken the following commitments. That is, comply with the objectives that are set, encourage a traditional Main Street, as well as development and redevelopments that value the positive aspects of the actual aspect of the area. 2, have public spaces, covered areas with landscaping, accessible to each and every one, and public art that reflects the history of the district. 1.4.1 Montreal Road. Along Montreal Road, the center area is designated as the French Quarter. You know that. And its role is that of an intersection for the cultural identity of Vanier. Public art, street furniture, infrastructures, and contemporary interpretation that is offered by the design of buildings are some of the elements that reflect the history of the French Quarter. How can this proposed project meet those objectives? Daily, I would like to continue to be served in French in Vanier, as well as elsewhere in Ottawa. Will the Salvation Army coffee shop offer services in the language of my choice? I'm also objecting to your decision to allow amendments, zoning amendments, for the following reasons. I only have 3. Too large concentration of comings and goings and criminal activity that we've known in the Byward Market that will affect the quality of life and the safety of citizens. 2, I'm concerned with drugs, prostitution, having more street gangs in the area, and intrusions on our properties. 3, I'm also concerned with the increase of car traffic that will be caused by the opening of the former street Reginald, close to my house. Those will have an impact, a negative impact on the quality of my life, my health, my safety, and will contribute to my isolation. In order to help our most vulnerable citizens, I would propose the approach that is found in the official plan, housing first, where they would be spread out in different areas of Ottawa. Thank you.
Conseiller Fleury has questions.
Bonjour, Madame Beauchamp.
Good morning, Ms. Beauchamp. Thank you for your wonderful presentation and the clarity of your submission. I have a personal question. Do you frequently walk in the Barwood Market? Yes, in the summer we also use our bikes. We go very often. You are a senior. Members of council are very interested in access, ensuring that seniors be active in the community and be safe. So what is your impression if you've walked the block between Cumberland and Dalhousie on George? Have you been there before? What's your impression? My first impression is that we're afraid now. There's always people who are begging for money and they say bad things. So less and less do we use our bikes to go. We take the car. That's my first impression. What model, what do you think of the model that is submitted by the Salvation Army? What is the impact? Is it only on the sidewalk? You know, Councillor.
It's not part of what we're asking, but I'll allow it to the delegation.
Bien, moi, je crois que
I believe that what is proposed by the Salvation Army is a reflect. It should innovate, and we don't want people going on the sidewalk with drugs, even offering us drugs or asking for drugs. So this is the issue of centralizing services. So it's the same problem on George Street. Yes, of course. Thank you.
Merci. Thank you for coming.
Merci.
We have an empty seat too. We have two empty seats now. Rosemary Leach, are you here? Rosemary, come forward. And Tara O'Halloran. Tara? Okay, so we'll go back to Hortense. Hortense, are you Hortense? No. Marilyn. Okay, I've got, now I'm really confused. So I've got, let me just make sure who I haven't called up then. Hortense. Where's Hortense? Is that you coming down the stairs? Okay. There she is. Sorry about that. So are you Hortense? No? Okay. So we have Marilyn Jocko, and you are followed by Hortense Cayo. Is Hortense here? Okay. Rosemary Leach, and Tara O'Halloran. Tara, have a seat. Thank you. So, sorry, Marilyn, you have 5 minutes. Thank you. Can you press the button so that the red light comes on?
Sorry.
There you go.
Bonjour, mon nom c'est Marilyn et je suis la réceptionniste à la...
I'm Marilyn, and I'm the receptionist at the Salvation Army, and I'm also a Vanier resident.
I see a lot of what goes on at the Salvation Army. It's a very complicated place with a lot of complicated people with a lot of complicated problems. I see about 50 people a day who come in for emergency food assistance and vouchers, and others who have like housing related appointments, and some people who just come in to talk. I meet a lot of people who come to access our service at CFS, which is Community and Family Services for Emergency Assistance. One of the services that CFS offers is MoneyWise. MoneyWise is a program designed to help singles and families gain stability in housing and financial affairs through coaching, trusteeship, and support. The program serves recipients of social benefits, pensions, and/or wages, and managing their money in order to decrease the risk of homelessness and to learn to manage their own personal finances responsibly. The other service that we include is emergency food bank, clothing, and houseware vouchers. All our food is from the food bank and donations from the city. The clientele that we deal with range from mothers, families, single parents, Syrian refugees, and newcomer to Canada. In the new building, CFS will be located on the ground floor with a separate entrance, which will minimize the risk of young families being exposed to the vulnerable population, which is the way it works now. This will give clients a sense of security in a non-judgmental environment. This will provide clients with a safe environment to access the specific services that they require. There will also be a thrift store on site, which will be an improvement. Now when a client comes for a voucher, they have to go to different locations for their thrift store. This will be a one-stop shop. And in conclusion, I just want to say that this will be an improvement with everyone's needs being met, as everything now will be separate. Our clients will continue to be treated with respect, compassion, and caring. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marilyn. Councillor Fleury has a question. Okay.
Thank you, Marilyn, and thank you for your presentation, and thank you for your engagement on today's discussion. I want to be clear. This is not in opposition to the Salvation Army. This is I'm opposed to the site that they propose and the approach. I'm curious to hear from you. You named a wide range of services, all of which are very relevant and very meaningful to our community. Is there a reason why those services could not be separated into various locations, in your mind?
I think that everything should be kept together, because some of our clients that we do get, like they're from the other services that we offer, so I think we should keep everything together.
You were talking before about some of the Syrian families and some of the families. We know that, for example, the Salvation Army currently, but also on the new location, does not propose a family shelter. So why would that why would that service be required on that location? Could the Salvation Army not offer family services elsewhere and offer maybe a more safe environment than what it is today?
Okay, what I meant to say is for the food bank services, like we offer it to families, to the Syrian refugees. It's for the food bank for vouchers, which is the clothing and the housewares. It's to access our food bank.
Okay, but I'm not hearing a compelling reason on why it needs to be in one location. Is there one, or because the food bank is one aspect, the food bank could be located in a different location, don't you think?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marilyn, and we acknowledge the fact you're not an expert, so maybe some of the questions she just doesn't have the answer to, as have been the case with some others. Thank you, Marilyn. I'm going to call for Hortense Cayo again. Is Hortense here? This will be the last time I call. Okay, so we're going to Rosemary Leach. Before we do, though, is Sanita Mellington here? Sanita? No? I'll call her again, but we'll ask Jillian Kirkland. Jillian, you're moving up the list quickly. Come on and have a seat, and I'll make sure that I call Sanita again before. So, Rosemary, you have 5 minutes. Thank you for coming today.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to present to Planning Committee on this matter. As you know, my name is Rosemary Leach. I've lived in Vanier for 4.5 years. There are any number of ways to characterize Vanier. It's eclectic, diverse, colorful, edgy, rough, poor, complex. The list goes on. One word that is never used to describe Vanier is exclusive. Vanier does not shun shelters nor shy away from the people who use them. On the contrary, with a large number of shelters in this area, they are part of the fabric of our community. What we do oppose, however, is a shelter of the scale and magnitude proposed for 333 Montreal Road, adjacent to a mature neighborhood and along a designated traditional main street. A main street strives to be a place of business and social interaction that is pedestrian-friendly. In planning terms, a traditional main street is intended to accommodate a broad range of uses, including retail, commercial, office, residential, and institutional. With the Salvation Army's abstinence policy and its minimal harm reduction strategies, the shelter's clients who use drugs and alcohol may find themselves spilling onto Vanier's traditional main street. This could encourage even more predatory drug dealers and payday loan stores to the area. 2 police audits in 2016 around the Booth Center on George Street confirmed this activity at that location. This is not a recipe for recovery, let alone economic redevelopment along one of Vanier's traditional main streets. An amendment to the official plan for a traditional main street should be rejected if it will hurt the chances for economic growth along a traditional main street. With this in mind, I urge you to turn down this application. It will kill Montreal Road's chances of ever becoming a traditional main street. Vanier needs an influx of viable businesses, not more pot shops and payday loan stores. A handful of promising shops have popped up over the past few years, but there's been a distinct chill since the announcement of the Salvation Army's proposed shelter at 333 Montreal Road. This proposal is not only scaring away investors and business owners, but also families who would move here and patronize those businesses. It doesn't make sense to amend the official plan to pave the way for an institution that will hobble Vanier's chances for economic development with a traditional main street at its core. Trading the problems that exist on George Street and redoubling them on Montreal Road is not an answer to the issue of homelessness in Ottawa. Shelters of this scale do not belong on any main street, not in Westboro, not in the Market, not in the Glebe, not in Barrhaven, and certainly not in Vanier. Moreover, the proposed site is just meters from the Wabano Aboriginal Health Centre, which delivers health care to the largest pocket of Aboriginal people, an already vulnerable group in this city. Aboriginal women and young children go there for their health care. As the inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women stumbles along, the thought of placing 350 at-risk men in close proximity to this facility is nothing more than a ticking time bomb. In the era of reconciliation, it would be unconscionable to situate this facility here. This is not an easy question, and there are no easy answers. However, problems that are already hindering Montreal Road's revitalization should not be amplified because an amendment is made to the official plan to place a shelter that does not fit with planning policy objectives is put there. Surely there are more fitting places to deliver these services away from a main street. Ottawa follows a 3 R's motto. It is time to think about a separate set of R's for Vanier: revitalization, economic redevelopment, and certainly, as we sit on unceded Algonquin territory, reconciliation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I see no questions. Thank you, Rosemary, for coming out today. Is Sunita Millington here? Huh? Pardon? Okay. I'm taking her off the list then. All right, so Eric Kayat. Eric, K-H-A-I-A-T. If you're here, come and take the empty seat, please. And so now we're going to go to Tara O'Halloran. Tara, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair. My name is Tara O'Halloran, and I'm a lifelong Ottawa resident, and I live across from the George Street Salvation Army. I'd like to thank the committee for giving all citizens the opportunity to speak on this item, regardless of their position or issue raised. First, I'd like to mention that the Salvation Army does good work that I can attest to, as I visit a family member who lives in one of the old age facilities here in town. And I recognize that the committee and the city face time constraints to decide on development projects put forward for approval. While not the focus of my presentation here, I disagree with the proposed location, and I think anyone in the room would agree that Vanier has always had more than its fair share of poverty and drug problems. As an aside, I mention this because I didn't have a place for it elsewhere in my submission. I was wondering where the closest safe injection site would be for Montreal Road residents now that they wouldn't have shepherds nearby. And I was also, when listening yesterday, hearing about co-location being a good model, wondering where are women going to get this same co-location service. All that said, I'm here to recommend that the Planning Committee either temporarily hold on a decision or, if necessary, vote against this project. Why do I say this? Well, while I'm cognizant that today's agenda item relates to plan amendment and zoning, holistic strategic planning is not done in a vacuum. It's very unfortunate the city's Community and Protective Services Committee didn't meet beforehand to discuss this proposal. This is where the social impact aspects could have been discussed. How we can justifiably proceed on a decision regarding such a socially focused project with this gap in the process is unclear to me. This committee's terms of reference, however, recognizes a holistic approach as one of its specific responsibilities under the planning section is to, quote, ensure the proper investigation and survey of the physical, social, economic, and environmental conditions in relation to the development and redevelopment of the land within an urban boundary. While perhaps this proposal is not considered development, redevelopment. In any event, we know that reasons for homelessness can range anywhere from a breadwinner losing their job to addicts, mental health issues, so on. Yes, some need counseling and some need a bed for the night, but literature and research and positive outcomes indicates a solution for certain people along this continuum lies with the Housing First model, which is being applied around the world and somewhat here. It's getting results and it's saving taxpayer money in the long run. With this model, we have the potential to eradicate and not just manage homelessness for specific target populations. Yet I might understand that we can't fully apply this model because we don't have enough accommodations. If the city doesn't have enough accommodations for Housing First, then it's not a problem with the model. It's a question of planning and making best use of taxpayer funds and creating housing. Yes, funds are needed, so accommodations can be built and or existing places rented. But we have a model that we're not fully taking advantage of, thereby perpetuating an increase in the need for more expensive alternatives in the long run, such as transition, shelter, temporary, however. But if we don't have the funds for something that pulls concrete results like Housing First, then how do we have the funds to pay for extra beds? And how do we afford to sacrifice frontage and square footage along a main street in lieu of business generating revenue, paying taxes, creating foot traffic, and revitalizing a neighborhood? It seems to me the Planning Committee would be involved in discussions to bring about Housing First here. Again, perhaps I don't clearly understand mandate, but the affordable housing section of their terms of reference scopes some responsibilities as, quote, make recommendations to council on how to adequately and affordably house Ottawa residents and provide options for increasing the supply of affordable housing, and make recommendations to council on housing policies for the city's official plan. In closing, approving this application because the city has timeline commitments would be premature. We need to make decisions that are financially sound and that make the best use of taxpayer dollars so that the city receives to address this social and economic problem. We need to further adapt and evolve and ensure that we are planning a holistic approach to our different types of homelessness along this continuum. And it starts with this proposal. It's not too late. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for that presentation. I do see Councillor Fleury is on the board.
Thank you for being here. I'd love for you to take a second. Your condo president did speak to committee yesterday. Can you, obviously you have diverging views on the approach. In your mind, the current situation has its own challenges, but until we find a more holistic situation, you believe that the current situation should stay until we invest heavily in Housing First. Could you maybe speak to as a resident that lives across the street from the existing location, how you see that, the needs, and how do you see that unfold?
That could take a long time to answer. I will say that I'm not an expert in the needs of homelessness, although I have worked for government on homelessness issues. I recognize there is a continuum, as I mentioned in my submission, meaning that there are people that are homeless for different reasons. And if you would like me to speak to those people that are homeless in front of my building, what I can say is that I don't think that they are going to, if we have the Montreal Road building, they're not just going to stay inside. They're still going to go out. We're social creatures. We need to interact. When I pass them, I say hi, they say hi. They like that. They like to talk to people. And so that's going to happen either way. People need fresh air. They need sunlight. They need to get out. And I think as someone mentioned, yes, there's a courtyard, but you know, you don't want to feel like you're in a prison, and maybe it's not a place to be.
Thanks for that. Maybe if I clarify my question, as a
Sorry.
resident across the street.
We're not going, I allowed the first, and I think that she did a good job at responding, but we're not going into housing first.
No,
in the
that's not where I'm
conversation.
going, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
As a resident across the street, do you believe that until a different discussion is happening, that council should hold off on any of today's submission? You live across the street. So
Yes, I do. And if for nothing more than making financially sound decision.
Thank you, Council. Thank you, Ms. O'Halloran, for coming out. Jillian? You're Jillian, right? So I'm going to, is Eric Kayat here? No? Okay, is Jamie Anderson here? Okay, Jamie, take a seat. And also Caitlin Clancy. Caitlin? Come on down. Okay. Jillian, please go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
It's working. All right, thanks. Hello, my name is Gillian Kirkland, and I am a citizen and a resident of Vanier. I welcome the opportunity to address the Planning Committee on issues related to the zoning of Montreal Road. Montreal Road is the main street of our community. The main street of a community is like the heart of a body. It is where the lifeblood of the community flows and where each of the parts can interact with the whole. In a healthy community, it is where neighbors reconnect and do business. But Vanier's heart is sick. It is overburdened by pawn shops and money changers, along with a bingo hall and strip club. This creates an environment that most of the residents seek to avoid. As a consequence, it has become a sort of dead zone where criminal activity of every time can flourish. To help the people in need who are already part of our community and to whom many of us have shown great compassion, we need to be enabled to create an environment that offers hope for a better future. A future that includes small-scale supportive housing, not a mega shelter. And here I would like to quote a report from the Mental Health Commission of Canada, At Home Chez Soi, dated 2016. Housing First rapidly ends homelessness across all cities. Housing First participants obtained housing and retained their housing at a much higher rate than the treatment as usual group. In the last 6 months of the study, 62% of Housing First participants were housed all of the time, 22% some of the time, and 16% none of the time, whereas 31% of treatment as usual participants were housed all of the time, 23% some of the time, and 46% none of the time. I'm very happy that this committee is interested in discussing this zoning issue. Premièrement, nous avons besoin.
First of all, we need to not have any other pawn shops on our main street because we have the distinction of having the highest concentration of pawn shops in the entire country. Secondly, we need to make sure that businesses such as the bingo hall and the striptease club cannot give their licenses to future owners. And third, we need to encourage the establishment of businesses that will benefit the neighborhood through an improvement plan. The most positive event over the past few weeks was the opening of a bagel shop. Finally, we need to invest in gathering spaces. We need to invest in gathering spaces for the community where we can get to know each other and build together the community that we want to live in.
This public consultation is a democratic farce, and that the decision of this committee has already been made. Be that as it may, we, the people of Vanier, will not stand by silently as our rights are trampled on once again for the sake of a misguided Band-Aid solution to a complex problem. Bigger is not better. The frustration you hear expressed today is not new. In fact, it has been building for decades. While Hinchenberg was getting a new aquatic complex, we were left to deal with the contaminated soil in our yards. When the Glebe was getting a modernized Lansdowne Park, we were picking up syringes in our children's playground. And while Orleans was getting a light rail station, we were fighting against having a mega shelter foisted upon the main street of our community. With all due respect, Madam Chair and committee members, we are not second-class citizens. We are not a convenient little dumping ground for all of the city's problems, and we are certainly not interested in returning to office those who have let us down time and again. Montreal Road is our main street and the heart of our community, and what that heart needs to regain its strength and its dignity is nowhere to be found in a mega shelter. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for coming out. Dennis Labossiere. Is Dennis here? Denny Labossiere? You see? And Drew Dobson is reading a submission for Magali Nayette. Drew, I see you. Come on down. Come on down. That's the way it's played. Okay, so Jamie Anderson, 5 minutes, please. Thank you for coming out.
Thank you for this opportunity. I'm a resident of Vanier, and I also have a small business in Vanier. This is what I do. I'm a music teacher. I teach in my home studio in Vanier. My students range in age from 6 to 80. My advertising says close to Beechwood. And I hate doing that, but I do it for two reasons. One, because I am close to Beechwood, and two, because if I said Vanier, I might get fewer phone calls. So instead I say near Beechwood, and when they call me, I convince them to come. And I've heard time and time again from new students, they look at my neighbor across the street raking his leaves and the kids next door playing hockey in the driveway and at the beautiful houses and the neat lawns, and they say, "This is Vanier?" And I say, "Yeah, this is my home. This is my wonderful neighborhood." Now, recently the BIA had a meeting, the first public meeting where those of us in the neighborhood were able to listen to what the Salvation Army had to say in person. And afterwards, we were given the opportunity to ask some questions. And so I got up and I asked the representative from the Salvation Army what I should tell my prospective students. Already some of them were hesitant to call me. And he smiled and he said, "Well, maybe our clients will want guitar lessons." I didn't even know how to answer that. Does he have so little regard for his clients that he can joke about them? Does he really think that someone who can't afford food and shelter is going to buy guitar lessons? And was he insinuating that I should volunteer to teach guitar? Now, I volunteer for a variety of organizations, including 2 where I teach music. In fact, I'm leading a ukulele jam that benefits the Heartwood House on December 1st, and they are a nonprofit based in Vanier, a wonderful nonprofit. So I'm not going to volunteer for the Salvation Army. But also his statement says to me that they have a disregard for the businesses there, for my livelihood, which is very important to me, and for all the businesses in Vanier. I was part of a committee that went door to door to the businesses on Montreal. And without exception, every one of those business people said, we don't want this mega shelter. Everything from the Shoppers Drug Mart, which is a huge chain, to a tiny little restaurant that's run by one woman, an immigrant, who said that would be the straw that broke the camel's back and she would have to stop. Now, will this affect my business? It might. I don't know. It's going to make traffic a lot worse, and already I hear complaints when my students arrive. My current students and I have been talking a whole lot because they see the SOS Vanier signs around the neighborhood and they want to know what that's about. And none of them have said, oh, great, move the mega shelter here. And I also want to add that I am an immigrant. I've only been a Canadian citizen for 3 years. And I'm a very proud Canadian citizen. But right now, I'm not very proud of this plan to move a mega shelter 5 blocks from my house that will not benefit their clients, nor will it benefit our neighborhood. Thank you.
Okay, so I have warned you so many times this morning. We're not wasting time. I want everybody to leave the gallery. We're going to have our lunch early. Everybody leave the gallery. Hopefully we'll do better this afternoon. Thank you very much. We have no questions for you. So
Thank you,
when we
Madam.
come back in half an hour,
45 minutes because lunch is at 12:30.
well, we have it. It's ready. It's ready. Lunch. The lunch, you know where we're going? Same place, okay? Thank you, everybody.